Hello, welcome to the Terry Nutlop Model Railway Station, a light here for all things model railways. Today we're going to be looking at the Big Four. The LNER, LMS, Great Western Railway, Southern Region? No, it's the Big Four scales and the Big Four mistakes that people moving from a train set up to their first proper model railway always make. And you won't guess what number one is. Stay tuned, let's get started. So let's have a look at what we've got here. These are the four main scales available in the UK. Now, with the slight variation of the fact that this is 00, which is really only for the UK, if we accept that this can also be HO, then these scales apply all across the world. So this first one is O gauge. Now, these are all the same engine type. They're all a Class OH shunter. So you can see the sizes compared to each other. And as I say, this first one is O gauge. That's a scale of 1 to 43, meaning that it's 1/43 the size of the real item. Now, this runs on 32mm track, which is O gauge. Here we have 00, which most people will be more common with. They would have normally had this in their first railway set, either 00 or N gauge, which we'll come to in a minute. 00 runs on 16.5mm track and is a scale of 1 to 76. This is the same gauge as HO for the rest of the world, which is 1 to 87. HO stands for half O, meaning it's half the size of O gauge. However, what we have to remember is it's not just half the size, it's an eighth the volume, because it's half the length, it's half the width, and it's half the height, meaning volume-wise, it takes up 1/8 the size of the O gauge. As you can see, that is quite small compared to the O gauge. We come down then to TT120, which is quite new in the UK, not long been introduced the last couple of years by Hornby. It's gaining popularity, and we'll talk about this in a moment. It runs on 12mm gauge track, as I say, to a scale of 1 to 120. And finally, we have N gauge, which is a scale in the UK of 1 to 144 scale, and it runs on 9mm track. As you can see, there's a giant difference between the N gauge and the O gauge. I shall just put the little N gauge one on top. As you can see, the size difference is dramatic. So what difference in these scales apply to you? What can you benefit, and what are the disadvantages of all of these scales? And we'll go through that now. So the first thing to deal with, and I was talking about this with somebody only yesterday, is that people have said to me at shows and at clubs and stuff, I'm moving up from N gauge to 00, or I'm moving up from 00 to O gauge because I can't see the detail, I can't see what's going on. Now, with all respect to people who've got macular degeneration and stuff like that, you know, obviously that's not reversible. When I've spoken to quite a few of these people and asked them, have you been to an optician recently? Oh, 10 years ago, they'll say. And the problem is, the further up the scale you go, yes, they're obviously easier to see initially, but O gauge has a lot more detail than 00, certainly with TT120, and when we're down to N gauge. And when dealing with figures, as an example, in O gauge, where in N you can just paint them the rough colours and they look acceptable, when you get to O gauge, you have to consider shading of people's faces and shading on clothing, otherwise they look very weird and very toy-like. And to get a realistic actual approach in O gauge requires a lot more attention to detail than it does, surprisingly, in N. With N gauge, you can get away with quite a lot because it's simply not visible. But when you get to a large scale like O gauge, then all of the detail is visible to the naked eye, and it stands out. So to say that you're moving to a larger scale simply because you're struggling with your eyesight, I don't think would help you very much. Of course, it's everyone's choice. I'm not telling people what to do. That's just my observation. But with O-Gauge, as I say, it's got a great deal of detail. All of these engines I've chosen because they're the same engine, and it's comparing like for like rather than trying to compare apples with pears. And with O-Gauge, there is a huge advantage in running, in the fact that the weight of the models allow for very slow operation, very realistic running and shunting. However, a lot of people don't appreciate just how large O-Gauge is, and although we can see it here compared to other scales, I shall just reach across, and until we see something like this, an O-Gauge coach, which you can see is very large indeed. When you consider that 4 of these behind, say, a Class 25, a realistic train that might operate in the Midlands or the north of England in the 1970s and 80s, something this size will be coming on for 8 to 9 feet long. So you're going to need a very, very large layout to operate realistic full-length trains, and that's just 4 coaches. Certainly if you were looking at a train with 10 coaches, you're going to need an enormous layout. It's the sort of thing that really is only suitable for people with garages or very large areas. Anyway, let's move on and we'll talk about some more scales. So with O-Gauge, it's really suitable for shunting, and certainly with photography, it can produce some fantastic images on the camera with very, very fine detail. When we get down to double O-Gauge, we're still looking at a lot of detail there. And of course, it's what is the most common scale in the UK. As I say, TT 120, relatively new, and N-Gauge, been about a long time, but only in the last few years has N-Gauge dramatically improved in quality. For a long time, N-Gauge was very basic and relied on trains being viewed from a distance. Now, with all of these models, they all have separately fitted handrails, etc. The O-Gauge and double O-Gauge one have sprung buffers, the other 2 don't. I wouldn't expect them to in the smaller scales. But you can even take photographs close up of an N-Gauge locomotive now, and it will look good. So quality-wise, detail-wise, all of these are comparable. They all have readily available track that you can simply purchase. You don't need to make track anymore for any of these scales. Pico do track for all of these scales now, readily available, as well as other manufacturers, of course. O-Gauge is for shunting. I'm jumping double O for a moment. N-Gauge allows us to have these 10, 12 coach trains in an area that's reasonable. TT 120 is a step up between the 2. Is it viable? Well, at the moment, I would say it's only just starting. It's catching on, but there's not a lot available in TT 120 at the moment. Certainly not second-hand. What is available second-hand is very expensive. And in my opinion, I got TT 120 just to have a little try with it. There's no great advantage with TT 120 over either N or double O. It's the halfway house. I think it loses out on both sides and doesn't gain on any. That's my opinion. I'm sure there are people watching this video that are very keen on TT 120, and it has appealed to a lot of people coming back into the hobby. I think if you already have one of these gauges, to move from an existing N or double O model to TT 120, you won't find a lot of benefit from it. But if you're coming back into the hobby and you want to get back into model trains, possibly TT 120 is the thing for you. Because of the limit of availability, you are going to have a mixture of eras if all you want to do is use ready-to-run items from the Hornby range, because their items range from the 1940s and 50s right up to the modern day, but there's not enough at the moment to cover the full spectrum. Certainly, I've seen people using this and they're happy to run an HST with the Flying Scotsman. If that's the sort of thing that suits you, then that's great. But if you want to look for greater realism and to have more locomotives suitable for a specific region or time period, then for the moment, I would leave TT120 to one side and concentrate on the other scales. So finally, talking about 00, of course, it's been about for a very, very long time in the UK, or the equivalent HO in the rest of Europe and North America, and indeed the rest of the world. And there is a vast amount of equipment available, new and, more importantly, second-hand with 00. 00 gauge, of course, is not a correct scale gauge combination. The correct scale and gauge combination for 1 to 76 scale would be to have a gauge of 18.83. That's called P4. But due to historic reasons, the majority of people use 00 running on 16.5 track. Now, for most people, including myself, although I know it's wrong, visually I can accept it. And unless you compare it literally side by side with a P4 layout, most people won't notice the difference. So out of all of these scales, what are the advantages? As I say, with O gauge, you've got detail, but it's large. It's heavy, it's big, you need a big area for it, and it's relatively expensive. Although this is dapole, a lot of engines are available now coming down even to the sub 200 price. They're still comparatively expensive when you include wagons and coaches at up to £200 compared to the smaller scales, simply because they're large. There's a lot more of the model and it costs more money to make. Jumping past the 00 gauge, we go to N gauge. N gauge possibly is too small for some people. There is a large amount of N gauge about. There is a large amount of second-hand N gauge about at a good price. But be aware that a lot of the older N gauge items are of a much less quality than the newer ones. Detail on a lot of the older models from the 70s, 80s and even up to the 90s wasn't to a modern standard. It was very basic, and the idea was to simply look at N gauge from quite a distance away, as somebody once said to me, in a helicopter view, and you simply saw trains going past. That's all N gauge was meant to be. Now N gauge locomotives run much better. You can certainly do good shunting with them, and so N gauge is a viable option if you're happy with the very small size. All model trains require you to make track accurately and lay the track accurately for good running, but certainly with the smaller scales, the slightest deviation or blemish in the track will show up much more than in the larger scales. So with N gauge, you need to be very, very accurate with your track laying, otherwise you'll have problems. As we've mentioned, TT120, it's starting. I believe it will catch on in time, but there's a long way to go with TT120. So unless you're coming back into the hobby and you've got no equipment, you just want to start in TT120, I don't think that's an option for most people at the moment. Which leaves us, of course, with 00. And this is partly one of the reasons why I'm doing this video, because in the next couple of videos, we're going to be starting a diorama. Why is it going to be in 00? Because at the moment, I think for most people modelling, 00 is the best scale and gauge combination. 00 has a vast amount of equipment, not just the locomotives and rolling stock, but signals, buildings, scenic items, everything available just to purchase. It's all there, and there's a huge amount of it second hand at very reasonable prices as well. You can do it on a budget. You can go to the other end and have very top end equipment. Everything's there for what you want. So I would always recommend people starting, stick for the moment with your 00. Now, how is this connected to the mistakes that people make? Well, we're going to go on to that. And as I say, you won't guess what the fourth mistake is. So keep watching. Right, so we're back and I've moved away those 408 shunters. And we've got something else to look at here briefly. And what is this? This is the EFE Rails Class 74. And I've combined it there with the Sonic Models Ferry Wagon. Now here's a good example of 00 gauge in the fact that I can't ever predict a Class 74 being available ready to run in O gauge, possibly N, but in O gauge it's too rare, too unusual. That's why modelling in a popular scale, the most common scale in the UK, or HO, one of the most, if not the most common scale across the entire world, you've got a lot more available to you than modelling in an obscure scale. Of course, O and N aren't necessarily obscure. TT possibly is bordering on that. Still at the moment, as I said, it's growing, and one day it may well be very popular as well. But of course, there are lots of other scale and gauge combinations, and we'll go into them in a program after this when I'll be talking about narrow gauge. However, we're going to move on now to the 4 main mistakes that model makers encounter when they move from a train set to their first model railway. Now, if you've got a train set and you are happy clipping it together on the kitchen table and you take it apart and put it away, and you're happy with that, or you're happy with just putting set track pieces together and running trains around on a piece of board that you have in a garage or a bedroom or a loft, then you stick with it, because you are in the majority of railway modellers. Most railway modellers are happy with that. They're happy with an oval or a couple of concentric ovals, and they just like seeing trains go round and round. They're not particularly fussed what era or region it is. And if that's what you are, then you stick with it. There's certainly a lot of stigma recently, I've found on the internet, about train sets and how they're not very good and you've got to move away from a train set. Well, if you're happy with the train set idea, then you stick with it. But this is only for people that feel, I want a little bit more than the train set, and it's to avoid making the mistakes that I've made on every single occasion. Every one of these mistakes I've made myself. So learn by my mistake and don't waste the money like I have. Okay, so the first major mistake that people make when moving from a train set to another model railway, shall we call it, is what? And we'll go over to the inspector for this one.
Hey, what? What now, love? Oh, I was just thinking about the number 53 bus. Oh, God blimey. Oh, God blimey. Oh, you've caught me out now. Wasn't expecting that. I ain't got time for this. Oh, there you go. You didn't think I was going to get that love, did you? Time. There you go. That's the first one. Time. People underestimate time. Hey.
Thank you. Thank you, Inspector. Yes, the first mistake is, in actual fact, time. So when you clip to your train set pieces together and put them on the kitchen table, or you've made a train set on a permanent board and put buildings that are pre-made, etc. down, it's designed to be quick and easy to do. When you move on to another railway where you're maybe using streamlined track, flexible track, and you have to cut track, you have to wire it, you have to solder it, you have to cause all sorts of electric motors to be wired up and work, you're going to encounter problems initially. They're all problems that can be solved. I can assure you of that. And I'll be showing you this later on. But the problems, of course, lead to time. And time is used up. And so where you're used to possibly setting a train set out and it works in 10 minutes, the first model railway you come to do, you may be weeks before you even get a train running. And therefore, we have to consider the next issue. And the next issue, we will go over to Michael Train. Now, I have been doing my sums, and I have worked out that if you make a model in double O gauge of King's Cross Station, it can cost you up to £20,000. £20,000! So cost has to be taken into consideration. Thank you, Michael. Yes, the second largest mistake or miscalculation is cost. Now, cost, when we have a model railway, we've bought our model railway, we've bought our train set, it's a fixed price. We can add little bits and pieces to it, but pretty much we've got the majority of it right at the start. When we move on to a more developed model railway, cost can rapidly run out of control. Now, there are several ways, of course, to deal with cost, and all of these items are indeed linked together. However, the main way we can deal with cost is to make the majority of things ourselves. This, of course, will add on to the time. We can save time by buying things, but that adds on to the cost. So time and cost, as I've said in a previous episode, are directly linked together. I think it's important to see trains running before we move on to other more time-consuming things like buildings and fencing and lighting, which all takes a lot of time. It adds greatly to the model railway, but if we've got model trains running, we feel we've achieved something quite early on, and that gives us motivation to keep going. The third mistake that people make when they go over from a train set to a model railway is, of course, and we shall go over to our great friend who's come all the way over from CERN yet again to speak to us. It is Dr. Oswald Tuckworth.
Yes, hello, how are you? Excellent, yes. Now, I've just popped over from the Collider at CERN in Switzerland because Tellance was explaining to me that he wants to make a model railway that's a plank length. And I was saying to him, Tellance, my friend, I was saying that a plank length is so incredibly small. It's 1.616 by 10 to the minus 35 meters. It's so incredibly small that it is 10 to the minus 20, smaller than a proton of a hydrogen atom. Very, very small indeed, I was saying to him. I was saying it was so small that even subatomic particles would be gigantic, and it would be something that we couldn't actually formulate. And in fact, it could only exist in theory, of course, quite up my street. However, at that point, he passed me this. A plank length. So that's something we have to take into consideration. Size. And of course, volume. Excellent.
Thank you, Doctor. Yes, as you so quite rightly put, the third issue is space. People vastly underestimate space, as I was saying in the previous part, with the O-gauge coaches, 4-coach train and a Class 25, over 8 feet long. Space is greatly underestimated. And of course, it's not just the actual length of a train, it's the length of the points, etc., and all the room needed for a locomotive to pull forwards from coaches into a stop at the end, reverse back across the points, round the train. And so what would be an 8-foot train in O-gauge would require over 13 feet to allow a train to pull forwards, run round it on conventional pico points, and run back past the train and couple onto the other end. That is literally just the minimum length, and would require the train to end directly under a bridge or into a tunnel with no scenery other than the station itself. So again, space is something we have to consider. Space is something that's limited to everyone, even somebody with a garage. Of course, you may think, well, I'll have an enormous layout. The larger the layout that fills a huge double garage, the more it's going to cost, the longer it's going to take to build. So cost, time, and space are all interconnected. So even if you have a large space, the way to keep the costs down is to keep it basic. Sometimes a layout that is just 2 or 3 tracks running through scenery is quicker to make and much more cost effective than a massive terminus station. Of course, if you want a terminus station and you have the time and you have the money to make it, then go ahead. But be aware, and I've seen a lot of people that do this, they start a project keen to do King's Cross Station or Penzance Station, and only once they've started and already invested quite a bit of money into it, realise that it's beyond their scope. It's out of their budget they haven't got the enthusiasm or dedication to keep working on it for years to get it complete. I've seen many people lose interest in model railways after 1 or 2 years, and they've just got some track down. And in that way, keeping something small, keeping something achievable is the most important thing. Keeping things achievable will keep it within the space limitations, will keep it within the budget limitations, and will keep it within time limitations. Because unless you're retired and you have nothing else to do but make model railways, most people have other things to do, and other things take priority over model railways. Of course they do. It's just a hobby. So what do you think is the final mistake that people make? Number 4, the big 4. Well, I shall tell you, and it's quite a surprise. The biggest mistake that people make is they spend themselves into a corner. Now, what does that even mean? You're saying to yourself. And that is that they go and buy things from their model shop. They go to exhibitions, they go to shows, they go to toy fairs, and they see things. They go, oh, I like this, I like that. They can buy things that aren't compatible with what they've already got. They can buy model trains from different eras. They can buy model trains that are different scales, and they can mostly buy model trains, talking as we are here with 00, that are of a different level of detail, that when compared side by side don't really suit each other. Again, if you're the sort of person with a train set, and that's not a derogatory term here, but you're happy to run an HST with a 1936 Flying Scotsman with teak coaches, and you're happy to mix and match wagons and everything together, then that's fine. This doesn't apply to you. You buy what you want, you run what you want. That's partly what model trains are about, doing what you want. But if you want to move on to something more realistic, and you feel you want to represent a specific time and era, a specific area, then if you bought a load of 1936 Great Western Railway model trains, and your name is Colin, of course, you may find that now you want to move to the 1970s, as we have here, and a lot of your stock isn't suitable. As I say, with the train set type people, that's fine. But if you spent a lot of money simply buying things in shops because they look nice without actually thinking what you want, you can very easily spend yourself into a corner and find yourself trapped, now trying to justify making a model train, a model railway in 1936 that you didn't really want. You actually want to model 1974 because that's a memory you have. And a lot of modelling is creating memories. But because you've invested so much money in the stock for 1936 Great Western Railway, you feel that's what you have to do. And I've seen this again and again with railway modellers. I didn't really want to do this, but I had it already. I didn't really want to do the Great Eastern Railway, but I'd brought the engines. So what's the top tip here? And this is me speaking with nearly £60,000 worth of model trains in all different scales and gauges that I've brought over the last 25, 30 years. What's the answer? And the answer is, unless you've got money to spend on £60,000 worth of trains and have a lot of them sitting around in boxes like I have, still waiting to make layouts for them to run on, don't spend money at shows. Don't go mad in your local model shop. Go and look at your model shop. Go and visit them by all means. We must support our local model shops, and there's no reason why you can't buy a little wagon or a little wagon kit or some paint and some scenery bits and pieces that you will use in the future. But please avoid going to shows and just buying a nice big blue shiny engine because it looks great. A nice big green shiny engine because it looks great. Think about, do you need it? Think about how it will fit in to your layout and what you plan to do in the future. That way you'll save yourself a lot of money and you won't be stuck with items that you either leave in display cabinets or in their boxes like I do, or you're left with items that you have to then trade in And obviously the dealers and the second-hand market will not give you the full price because they're going to have to hold on to it before they sell it themselves. So you're going to end up losing money on items that you bought maybe only 18 months ago, and you trade them in for the era or the region that you want. Think twice before you rush in. And this brings us back to the last item that I want to mention. And that again is TT120. So here we are. There's our TT120. Now, as you can see, it's an 08 diesel, as all the other ones were before. Why is it in DB Schenker livery, you're saying to yourself? All the other ones are in the 1960s green colour, and this is DB Schenker modern region and livery and whatever and whatever. Why indeed? Impulse purchase, no more than that. It was at Milton Keynes at the Great Electric Train Show. I bought it from the Model Centre, £150 reduced to £89, I believe it was. Impulse purchase. I thought, oh, can't let that bargain go. Do I need it? No. What am I going to do with it? Don't know really, to be honest with you. I'm not going to make an entire layout just for that. I could repaint it to BR green. It's not as easy as you think, because obviously all the fine transfers and detail on it will be then lost. I can get transfers from Fox Transfers for it, but it's not going to be an easy job. Should I have bought it? Not really. It was an impulse buy. And I saw people at that show impulse buying HST 10 car sets because they were limited and they were going to sell out and all of the other things. I don't blame the Model Centre for this. I don't blame Hornby for this. But the whole thing now in model railways is that it's limited. You must get it quick because it will sell out. There won't be any available after next month. And I see lots of people rushing in to buy items because they think it's gone next month. I've got to get it now. And people were spending huge amounts of money buying TT120 HSTs, actually saying to the people they're buying them from, I don't have a layout to run it on. So if they make a layout to run it on, great, fantastic. And I hope they do. But I should think a lot of those trains will end up sitting in boxes for the next 2, 3, 5 years, maybe longer, and then they'll be up for sale. They would never have run. I've bought many, many trains on eBay that have never run. They were bought 10, 20 years ago. They've never been out the box. Don't make this mistake. Don't buy yourself into a corner. Don't spend money unnecessarily. It is the biggest downfall in model railways. I predict, I can't say for certain, but I would estimate that up to half of all model railways sold on all websites, on all manufacturers' websites, on all shops and online retailers and all the model shops, etc., across the whole of the country, never get used. A lot of items never come out of the box. I at least take them out of the box to film them, to show them to you. But a good example, the Class 74, it's never run yet. The Sonic Models ferry van, never actually been on the layout yet. So many items just get put to one side, they're bought, and that's not what model railways are for. Model railways are there to use. I never worry too much about keeping things in pristine condition and keeping them as collector's items. I do like to weather my railway stock. If you don't, that's down to you, of course. That's your choice. I like to weather things. Eventually I will get round to this, but I've got so much to do that weathering this is probably a year away at least. So to sum up, as I like to sum up things, please enjoy the model railway hobby. It's a fantastic hobby, but be careful not to overspend. Overspending in this hobby is very easy. There is a lot of temptation, and a lot of the manufacturers, understandably, they need to sell products. Push things on us now. They're limited. You've got to order it before it comes out. You've got to buy it even before it comes out. And so many items now, I'm sure, sit in people's cupboards, in their lofts, in their sheds, and aren't getting used. Have a little think. Be calm. Don't panic. a lot of the items that are supposedly going to sell out will be about. I believe these Class 74s have supposedly sold out from the manufacturer, but you'll still find them if you go and look on the model shops websites. If you go and look round model shops and type in Class 74 for sale, you'll find them still for sale, even though officially they've already sold out. There's always going to be model trains about, and if you can't get a Class 74, unless your heart was absolutely set on it, there'll be a chance to get one later. There'll be a chance to get one in a couple of years when somebody has had enough of it. As I just said, they haven't used it, they want to sell it. There's an endless loop of second-hand stuff going round and round on all the auction websites. So there's always going to be model train stuff about to buy. Don't be panicked into buying things you can't afford or you don't want. So I've rambled on enough today. In the next episode, I'm going to be doing a very brief description of narrow gauge. That's going to be like a separate video for those people interested in narrow gauge, the advantages and disadvantages of narrow gauge. And then in the following episode, as I said, we're going to be going on to starting a diorama in 00. It's going to be used so I can demonstrate things running, such as this Class 74, which we haven't actually seen running yet. And it's going to be to show you how to do a diorama for yourself. We're going to be going through everything: track laying, making the boards, wiring, making buildings, scratch building buildings, doing scenery, doing LED lights, everything. You'll see it. I'll show you how to do it. Soldering, everything you need to make model railways. There's no great trick to it. There's no mystery to it. Everyone can do it. All it needs is a tiny bit of confidence just to make a start, and that's it. And everyone can do them. It's for you. It's for everyone. As usual, I don't make any money out of these videos. They're not monetized. Everything you see is mine. I bought it myself just to show to you, or to use for myself, of course. But there's no money coming to this channel. So please like, subscribe, tick the notification bell for the next video. It doesn't cost you anything. It really helps me and promotes this channel on YouTube to get out to more people like you that want to watch this sort of thing. So once again, thanks very much. And as usual, from Desmond, who's sat very quietly up on the shelf yet again, and myself, usual catchphrase, nice one. I'll see you next time.